Hey folks, Eric from Hit Subscribe here, and today I'm doing yet another edition of the Freelancer Q&A series that I do here on Circle and then eventually on YouTube, where more likely you're going to see it on YouTube. That said, we are starting to do some events in this format, so maybe I will get live Q&A here in the coming weeks as we scale that up a little bit, or we don't, I don't know, who knows what's going to happen. But anyway, the subject this week is... this was a longer question, but I forgot to prep my notes for it. And the thrust of it was, what's the difference between a niche and positioning? So this was part of an email I got some years back when I was writing a lot about positioning and niches on the Dead Tech blog. And I'd actually said, let's do a niche case study where I invited people to write in, and I would record videos assessing what I thought of those niches. Anyway, this question, what is the difference between a niche and positioning, I think is kind of a subtle one and an important one. And it's one that for you as a freelancer, if you are a freelancer, might be a little, intermediate as a topic. Because typically a lot of freelancers are generalists, and I would argue that generalists don't really have niches or positioning really. You have a positioning if you're a freelancer, but by default, your positioning is usually I'm the cheapest. Now, sometimes you'll probably say I'm the best, but the best really just means I'm the cheapest in the long run. Because when you say that, it's usually because somebody is like, why would I pay you $100 an hour when this other person will do it for 50? And you'll probably say something like, well, I do a better job than them, so you won't have to pay them, or you won't have to pay someone to rewrite what I did compared to that person, which is really just I'm cheapest in the long run. It doesn't seem like it now because my hourly rate is higher, but trust me, I'm cheapest. So my point is the default positioning for a freelancer is I'm cheap usually. And the relationship between a niche and positioning is kind of about getting out of that race to the bottom. So let me talk through what those things are in some detail. Now, the heuristic that I would offer for the difference between a niche and positioning is your niche is about the market. It's about the people you serve. Your positioning is about you. So a niche is essentially, your mileage may vary. Other people may say other things about this, but this is how I use the term. And I think there's some validity to this across the board. I'm not just redefining and making things up, but I can see there being different takes out there. A niche is, it is your buyers. It's a buyer segment in the market. And I would further say that it's a buyer segment that is unified by some kind of common commercial interest, if you will, or at least some kind of common goal. And I'll get into some examples of what maybe is and isn't this in a moment, but it's all about your buyers. So the niche is a need. It's a gap in the market shared by a specific segment of people. So the niche is really who you serve. It's about them, not about you. Your positioning is how you present yourself to that niche. So like I was saying, the freelancer, in as much as you have positioning, is usually I'm the cheapest. So this is about you and why someone would buy from you and how you're differentiating yourself in serving your niche, who is your buyers and their needs. So, I made some note here, maybe some examples of a niche or things that I would think of as a niche. So this is what I've identified lately for Hit Subscribe, which is, I would say, a niche that we have is companies wanting to produce content without necessarily hiring full-time employees. So this is, it's maybe not the most targeted niche in the world, but the unifying theme here is they want content and they don't necessarily want to hire or sustain employees. So that's fairly specific. And those people are, united by their desire to achieve a goal in a certain way with a certain kind of savings. You could tighten that niche up further, if we were so inclined, by saying, startups who are who have raised an A round of funding and don't want to hire FTEs to create content. You don't need to, you can tighten or loosen your niche accordingly, but that would be an example of a niche because it's uniting the buyers. It doesn't say anything about how Hit Subscribe is filling that. need in the market. It's just, there is a need out there. These companies want to produce this content. They don't want to hire employees. So the need exists. How we choose to go about making the case for that is more to do with positioning. It can be B2B or it can be B2C. So I made a note that, like, you could say women who have just gone through a divorce. This is a niche. And they would have to be united by some commercial interest. So maybe it's women who have just gone through a divorce and are looking to recoup, lawyers' fees or something like that. So it's a segment that you can identify and that they have a common commercial need. Another one might be minor league baseball teams that are too close to a major league baseball city. This is a niche. They're united by they're easily identifiable, and they're probably united by like flagging ticket sales that they want to do something about. So, I could kind of go on here, but I hope the theme is becoming obvious, which is you need to be able to articulate who these folks are, companies, individuals. The more demographically and psychographically and so on that you can identify them, the better. And they also need to have some kind of like unified commercial interest because, you're in business, you want to serve that commercial interest. If I think about this, like in retail or whatever, like a niche, I'm in a little town here where we hang our hat a lot of the year in the summer months. And at my disposal, if I want to get food, I have like 2 diners and a bar. And so somebody could come into this town and say, I've identified a niche. There are a certain relatively cosmopolitan segment of the population that would like more dining options than that. That's a niche. So you could try to serve a niche here by opening up some kind of, other less basic cuisine here. So that's kind of what you're talking about with a niche. Now, what are some examples of positioning? So as I mentioned before, we're the cheapest. This is positioning. It speaks to why somebody would do business with you. So in this niche, like, let's look at my hometown that I just came up with here as an example. You have 2 diners and a bar. One of their niches might be, we're the only one of these that stays open until 10 p.m. Another one might be, we serve the cheapest food in town. And maybe a third is, we're a family restaurant. So the positioning here is how you're trying to convince the niche to do business with you. Other examples, so, we're the cheapest is going to be a common one and often a default one if you're in a commodified type of position, the way most freelancers are. So if you're going onto Upwork, you're going to try to kind of be the cheapest, but also say that you're the best, which is the cheapest in the long run generally. But you could also come at it from different angles that would justify maybe a more premium rate as a freelancer. So like, I have the most experience. Now what you're doing is you're trying to highlight something about yourself that speaks to a better outcome for the client. So why would I pay this higher hourly rate that you have? I'm not the cheapest in the long run, but other people who are cheaper are going to step in landmines along the way to a deliverable that take down your site, and you don't want that. So you could position yourself by saying you have the most experience. You could position yourself by saying that you have the most savvy risk management approach. So yeah, I do business with other people, but if you do business with me, I promise you these particular kinds of disasters aren't going to happen. You could position yourself as the most ethical operator. So, this is a little less of a thing in B2B markets, but maybe in B2C, if you think about people who are selling you retail goods on the basis that they're fair trade, or there's no animal testing, or there's, they're organic or something, they're speaking to ethical or moral beliefs that you have as a buying consumer. So you can serve a niche in this fashion with positioning based on some statement about the integrity with which you do business is another example of positioning. So hopefully that kind of clarifies what these 2 different things are. So the next question that you might have is, how do they work together? And the way that I would answer this is that you use your positioning to appeal to the people defined by your niche. So if you're thinking about a business and you're kind of trying to hone in on what you might do, and by the way, this question and a whole lot of questions like this came up in the context of people who are freelancers or salaried people looking to go start a business, wanting to start a business that's something other than just, I do generalist app dev on Upwork and it's $65 an hour. And I would get a lot of questions about how do you figure out what to do and what to offer and all that. So a lot of the advice I would give about identifying a niche is to do market research, do listening tours, talk to people, see what kind of pains they have, and start looking for patterns. If you're not comfortable doing this, you could do other things like lurk on a lot of communities or Q&A sites or something, and look for patterns in pains expressed in those venues, people that are wanting something that they currently aren't getting, um, people who are maybe using some solution constantly, talking in the same way about how it's inferior, it's not meeting their needs. Um, you can go out and do all flavors of research of this nature. I mean, you could also just try guessing at a niche, but I wouldn't do that. I would be doing research, whether it's via calls, whether it's going out and lurking on the internet, whether it's email campaigns, asking questions, whatever. But what you're going to want to do is go out and look for unmet needs in the marketplace of some kind, and you're going to collate a list of these unmet needs. So, it might be that you're seeing a lot of people who are in the forums or like the bug report section of like a popular tool of some kind. And over again, they're expressing that they wish the tool did something. And then you're going around to other similar competitive tools and seeing that those tools also don't do that something. So here's a niche. There is a group of people that are unified by a concept. They're project management tool users, and they're unified also by a commercial interest. Like I wish it would show me a unified calendar view. So the thing that you're going to be doing when you're trying to decide what kind of business you might want to have is gathering up these niches. And I wouldn't just pick the first one that you run across. Compile a list of them and think about what's possible. And then there's a lot of ways, and I don't want to make this video boiling of the ocean in general, like how to establish a business, because we're talking about the difference between niche and positioning. But there's a lot of ways that you might collate these. Who do you like the idea of serving? You don't want to like get into business with customers that you hate or ethically oppose doing business with or something. So who do you like serving? What kind of work would you feel comfortable doing and would be sustainable for you? So you're going to narrow down these lists of potential niches that you might serve. Once you have that and you start to think about how to appeal to this niche and how to sell things to them, you're going to think about a way to go to market. Like you're going to bring some kind of offering to the market. This is where positioning starts to enter the mix. So if you're thinking about the people that I talked about before in this hypothetical example, that you found a deficiency across all the different project management tools like Atlassian's tool and Asana and all those, what do you know about the people that typically use those tools? They probably are working in businesses. So you might start to narrow it down and say, okay, these are folks that are, typically going to be in different sized businesses, but probably not so like they're big enough to need project management as a concern. They're probably sophisticated enough to be adopting project management as a concern. So these businesses probably have an operations department. So maybe I can niche even further into saying I want to identify people in operations groups that have these gripes about all of the project management tools. So you start to think about, what do operations at small to mid-sized businesses like? Who are these people? What is their educational background? What are they like? What are their hopes and dreams? And so on and so forth. And the more vivid a picture you can paint about these people, the more you can start to think about how you can appeal to them. And this speaks to your positioning. So, maybe these operations folks are, and I'm just making things up here, but maybe they job hop a lot, or maybe they're always looking for a promotion and they're sort of like passed over in this context until they job hop or something like that. So if you started to discover something like that, and I really truly am making things up off the cuff, I don't know that this is true of operations folks or whatever, but like if that is true, you could start to position yourself as not only do I have an implementation or a tool that like fills this spot in these markets, but it's delivered in such a way, and we do business in such a way that we are going to actually be able to help you even when you're hopping across jobs. And in fact, we not only serve you in this capacity, but our whole brand is associated with helping you with your career. So you might think about this positioning and then creating a bunch of content marketing around helping operations people with their careers. You are positioning yourself as the steward of their career. So not only is your tool helping them get things done faster, but your business and your brand are helping them advance and meet goals beyond just the immediate ones. So again, the niche is the group or the segment of the market that is unified by some common interest, some common commercial interest, and your positioning is how you're going to go about differentiating yourself and appealing to them and serving them in the best way that you can. My last bit of notes here, I see that, in the freelancer world, I was calling this like kind of pitfalls and mistakes. Like I see a few common themes that make me scratch my head a little, especially among people that are doing copywriting. I see this where they're saying, I'm a copywriter, but I want my niche to be, e-commerce business, or I want to, write about HR. And I think you see this in app dev a little bit too. Like, what's your niche? Like, oh, well, I do Ruby on Rails. Like, oh, okay, that's not a niche. That's just a tool that you use. Oh, I do Ruby on Rails for e-commerce businesses or something. I think it's better business to be more specific. Anytime you're trying to market into a segment of the market, the more you can identify them and talk to them, the better. So I think it's better to say, I'm a copywriter for HR businesses, as opposed to I'm a copywriter. And I think it's better to say that you do Rails development for e-commerce business than I do Rails development for anybody. But I don't think either our copywriter or our application developer here has really identified a niche, because the only thing that the HR businesses you're writing copy would really be unified for by is your services. So like, I help anyone that's somehow related to HR that wants somebody to write copy. It's not really a niche. If you wanted to drill into that further and think about businesses in the realm of HR, like, well, you could start to think about like what kind of HR, like payroll, complaint escalation, So, if we're zooming in here, get a little more specific than HR, maybe I help businesses that are doing things related to payroll on a subscription model. Once you start to understand and get a little bit crisper about who you're looking at, now you can start to look at what are common issues associated with those types of business. So is it that businesses that are helping with payroll in a SaaS capacity, like, do they tend to really struggle on the back end with a lot of like legal concerns dealing with different like state and national entities? You start to understand their pains. Now, understanding back end problems might not be as relevant to somebody who's doing copywriting, where you'd probably be helping them in marketing. But, maybe, I mean, if you're helping them write internal documentation about managing regulations, I guess, I probably ought to like make some notes where I'm like, okay, here are the examples I'm going to work through, and then think them through in the slightest way. I am absolutely making these hypotheticals up off the cuff. But if you're looking at the challenges that marketers have maybe in marketing payroll software, it's going to get kind of specific. And if you start going out and talking to the marketing departments for payroll software, I bet you're going to hear similar types of things, which might be that like, it's kind of hard to differentiate, or, maybe it's such a major decision. We have these really long sales cycles, or, everybody's heard of ADP. They're the big gorilla. It's really hard to compete with them. So now you're starting to get a picture of a group of businesses or a group of folks that are struggling to differentiate themselves, being dominated by, a monopolistic concern in the market or whatever. So you can start to really zoom in and say, well, okay, my niche is that I have this particular kind of business, but what I'm really seeing, the unifying theme here is I'm helping you stand out in a dominated market that's otherwise undifferentiated. So my positioning is in this niche that I help you really get people's attention, really stand out. And in order to do that, you have to get kind of controversial. So this is, the more specific you get, the more likely you are to identify an actual niche, which is groups of people or businesses that have kind of a common concern. And if you tackle it, by the way, as I kind of rambled through this example, you might find that it isn't unique to like payroll companies, that they find themselves dominated by a single big player in the market and everybody else is scrambling for market share. You can go and identify other situations where that's happening and then bring your attention grabbing copywriting to bear. So you can actually, when you find out niches, you can find lookalike niches that are going to be amenable to the same kind of positioning. So I would not stop when it comes to thinking about your niche. Don't think about what you do. And this kind of goes back to the difference between these things. So if you're saying like, well, HR related companies are my niche because I'm familiar with that domain, that's about you. It's not about the buyers. And that's, I think, a mistake that gets made. You can make the positioning about you, but not the niche. You need to dig in and see what kind of pains and commercial interests unify those buyers. And it can't just be that they're willing to give you money. You need to figure out why they're willing to give you money, what pains they have, and then you can start to have some positioning. Because I'll tell you the one bit of positioning, and I'll leave you with this. I've actually written a blog post about this kind of at length. I do good work is terrible positioning. Number one, that should just be table stakes. Like, I mean, who goes out into the market and is like, I do really bad work. I'm in services. Everybody will say at least that they do decent work. I mean, if you're really trying to differentiate yourself by being cheap, you might say like, hey, I'm McDonald's. What do you want from me? I produce, but beyond that, everybody is claiming to be the best or something, and it's not true of anybody. It's unverifiable. It's really not good positioning. You should assume that being good at what you do is table stakes and seek out some kind of other positioning. So that's kind of the thing to bear in mind here is to really fill a niche. You need to understand that niche and what unifies them and what their pains are. And then your positioning needs to be about why you are uniquely suited to alleviate those pains. And it shouldn't be because you're good at what you do, because if that's how you're positioning yourself, it's a strong signal you don't really understand why people are buying from you. And what I mean is, if they're buying from you because there's a profit motive, if they're buying from you because they know you can save them $20 million, they don't care how good or bad at anything you are. If you can save someone $20 million, you had them at that. You don't need to make a case for anything else. So to summarize, niche is about the buyers, and it needs to be some kind of unifying thing that segments them and unites them in terms of a commercial interest. Positioning is about you. That's the piece where you're speaking to why you are well qualified to fill and serve that niche. So hopefully all of that makes sense, and I will catch all of you next time.